today's talk is to introduce you to Strecks, to tell you what it is, why it was written, and who can benefit from using it. Just to tell you briefly about myself, my name is Phil Zoio. I'm an independent software developer and consultant. I've written articles for various industry publications. I maintain a number of open source projects, 4 to be exact, and particularly I'm the creator of Strecks. So what is Strecks? Well, Strecks is a set of Java 5 extensions which brings, in my opinion at least, simple and elegant web development to existing Struts applications without the pain of migration. So the idea really is to add to the Struts framework to make it better, to make it work better. So, why does Strecks exist? Well, by mid-2005, which is round about the time which I started working on the functionality which has become Strecks, Struts was still very much the market leader, and it probably still is, certainly in terms of deployed applications. But technically, it had been overtaken by other frameworks. And we can see this is pretty much evident from the fact that the Struts development team itself has chosen an alternative framework, WebWork, as the basis for future developments. And I was in a position where I was implementing a new application, and it was kind of mandated to be in Struts. And at the time I wasn't too happy about it, but I thought, okay, what I'd like to do is to add some features to it which can make it work in the way that I want it to work, so that I can build the application in the way that I'd like to. And Strecks basically arose as a result of that work, plus some additional features and another kind of iteration of tidying things up. So, what is the scope of Strecks? It's certainly, the idea is not to replace Struts with a completely new framework, but really to enhance it and to fix the parts which, for me, weren't working, weren't allowing me to write applications in the way that I'd like to. And specifically, I was looking at actions and action forms. And, I mean, that really is the kind of meat and drink of where things happen, certainly in a Struts application. But the idea really was not to change things that didn't need changing, at least for my purposes. So still using existing configuration mechanisms, the familiar Struts config XML, and still using existing tag libraries. So just a couple of details about the project. It's hosted on SourceForge. It uses an Apache 2.0 license. And version 1 of the project was released in just over a month ago. So I've got a couple of URLs there which you can look at to find out more details about the project. I'm just going to show you just the kind of obligatory Hello World application and show how it's implemented in Strecks. And hands up, who hasn't worked with Struts before? So most of you, I think, would probably have some experience. So you're probably fairly sort of familiar of how you would do a Hello World application in traditional Struts. So here's a launch page, which is just simple HTML. And there we go. We can see here that it's mapped to hello do, and it's passed in a name parameter, which is just passing in my name. So, how does this get implemented in Strecks? Well, first there's the Struts config XML, which is absolutely no different from what you'd expect it to look like. It's got the mappings, it's got the success mapping, which maps to hello JSP, which is a page you just saw. The type is hello world, which is the action class. Where things start getting quite a lot more interesting is in the action implementation. Now you probably look at this and you'll probably think, this doesn't look like a Struts action. I mean, it doesn't extend action, the Struts action class. And in fact, there's nothing in there which looks very Struts-like at all. Basically, what happens with Strecks is the Struts action is effectively divided into 2 parts. There is what's known as the action bean, and that's where most of your application code will go. And this is what you see in front of you right now. And there's a collaborator which is called the action controller. And the action controller is what extends the struts action class. So this slide shows just, if you like, the duality of this action implementation. You have on the one side, you have the controller action, which extends action. It implements processing workflow, if you like, and it calls action bean via an interface. The action bean implements this controller interface and does what the framework can't do. So it's quite a powerful idea, because basically what you can say is, from the point of view of the action, the controller is doing all the stuff which is repeatable, which can be kind of, if you like, generic workflow type stuff, which can be encapsulated separately and then reused as a controller. And then it's simply a case of saying in your action bean, I want to use this controller. And from the point of view of the action bean, all you need to do is make sure that you implement the right interface. So just coming back to that particular implementation, we have an execute method, and you can see it's not doing very much. It's just building the message and returning success. Then another thing which you'll probably notice here is, which is different, is this inject request parameter. Now, you noticed back here that there's this request parameter name equals fill, and essentially the role of this inject request parameter is to bind that method parameter to the name property in this action bean instance. So there is dependency injection, which is used to effectively consume request parameters. There's lots of other different types of dependency injection available. So for example, there's dependency injectors which will inject session attributes, which will inject servlet context or struts artifacts, spring beans, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's actually very, very simple to add new dependency injectors, because all you need to do is add an annotation, add an implementation, and it can already be done probably in about, say, half an hour to add a fairly simple dependency injector. You can extend the capability of the framework very easily in that way. Just the last part is this of the implementation is the JSP. And I mentioned earlier on that the purpose of Strecks wasn't to replace the view, but it does have a small tag library, and one of the tags is this action bean tag, which has a very simple job of taking this action bean instance that we've just seen and making it available as a page scoped variable. And this allows us then to use a JSTL expression to extract the message. And just coming back to the action bean instance, there we have get message, which is returned using that action.message and outputted onto the page. So the main point of this example, I mean, I certainly don't have time to show a more complex example, but the main point of the example really is to show you, if you like, the philosophy of the way that Strecks is working. What it's trying to do is trying to remove the kind of boilerplate type stuff which we see perhaps a bit too much of in Struts applications, and replace it, where possible, with declarative elements using Java 5 annotations. So, Strecks features, we have, I unfortunately don't have time to talk about these in detail, but we have closure actions, which we've just seen right now. We also have, for improving the way that form handling works, declarative validation, type conversion, and data binding. And once again, that follows a similar type of philosophy where it's trying to reduce the amount of code using annotations and just make applications simpler and more elegant. It has dependency injection, which I've already spoken about. Interceptors. So interceptors can be defined either across the application, or they can be defined to operate at a per action bean class level. Pluggable views, that's another kind of interesting innovation, which effectively allows you to add an abstraction where you can replace the view rendering implementation with what is default in Struts. So for example, there is a Spring View annotation which allows you to tap into the Spring MVC view rendering mechanism, and that's particularly useful, for example, if you want to output PDFs or Excel type output, which is not really supported within vanilla Struts applications, but well supported within Spring MVC. Seamless Spring integration, which I think is pretty much mandatory for web frameworks these days, and mentioned the view integration, but another couple of aspects are injecting Spring beans is pretty straightforward, and also using another annotation. You can simply say that this particular action should be Spring managed. All you need then is a declaration in the Spring configuration file to make that happen. Easy extensibility. So the idea with annotations is that they are self-describing. If you want to create a new annotation, at the same time you specify the class which has the intelligence to extract information from that annotation and make it available to the Strecks runtime. So it allows you to extend the capability of the framework without changing any configuration files or any classes. And there is, of course, compatibility with Struts 1.2 and 1.3. So who can Strecks benefit? Well, I think Strecks can really help you if you are a user or certainly familiar with the Struts framework. You want to use a modern web framework which has the kinds of features that I've just spoken about, but you're not willing or able to, you're not in a position where you can migrate, which can be quite an expensive and quite a costly business. So what you can really do is, in a fairly sort of riskless way, you can take advantage of all these new features without having to go through the pain of, if you like, throwing away what you've got and replacing it with something completely different. So, go on, give it a try, and let us know what you think. And I've got time for about, well, just a couple of minutes worth of questions, I think.
Any questions? Does it require a Java 5?
Yes, it does. It does require Java 5. It uses annotations and also internally uses a lot of Java 5 features. So yes, that is, if you like, that's the one kind of major restriction. It was built really around the capabilities of the Java 5 platform.
Would you recommend it for new projects?
I would, for a new project, I get asked what I'd recommend about new projects. I think so much depends on what kind of project it is. I mean, if for example, if it's a web application, a traditional web application, I'd say absolutely, because it does it in a very kind of elegant way, in my opinion. So yes, I guess I wouldn't be standing here if I wouldn't. But of course, obviously, if you have some very specific requirements that aren't covered by the functionality of this framework, then perhaps you may need to go elsewhere.